to add the friends. If we can quickly introduce ourselves, the organization we come from, so that we get to know each other before we start. And we also want to share with you that this conversation will be recorded for the report's sake. I hope you all agree that it's fine that we can record, because we want to produce a report which we will share to different partners, including government. So we want to make sure that we capture everything. Let's introduce ourselves in the chat room. Then we give maybe 2 to 3 minutes for others who are trying to join, and then we can start our dialogue.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, good morning.
This is Mana Lady Milete from Passover Community Building Organization.
Thank you, thank you. Just for the sake of time, let's introduce in the chat room the organization, and if you want colleagues to get your contact, you are free to share your email. Fine. Good morning once again. Colleagues, I want to check if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Good, good. Thank you so much once again for making time. When we were deciding on the date for this dialogue, it wasn't easy to put it on Monday after the long weekend because we know many people, it was for time, for family time. Others took this time, since we are in level 2, to go out with families. So it wasn't easy, but this is a dialogue which we thought we cannot really keep on postponing because of the urgency of it. So we really appreciate your time for making it on a Monday morning after a very long weekend. And we hope that you enjoyed your Heritage Day. I hope you did have time to connect with friends. So we are back to business. So I want to quickly check if we have all our panelists for the first session in the webinar already. Quickly checking if we have Ms. Colette of Hurisa. Oh yes, I see you, ma'am. Thank you so much. And I see we have Prof. Alexi. We also have Mr. David. So I think we are ready to start this conversation. As I mentioned, really thank you so much for everyone who made it. This dialogue is really a timely dialogue because of things which have been happening. We're going to go deep into the conversation. We try to have at least 2 hours and 15 minutes. But before we start, I really want to share maybe briefly why this dialogue is very important and how we came up to organize this. So we here on behalf of the South Africa CSO Working Group on SDGs, we are led by African Monitor and the Commission for Gender Equality, CGE. So the aim of this dialogue, which is a multi-stakeholder dialogue on addressing poverty and inequality as one of the pillars of the stipulated new social compact, we hope that this dialogue is going to be one of the many we're going to have just to provide alternative approaches to end poverty in South Africa. You have seen for some time, and especially the situation was made worse by the pandemic, the COVID-19, we all know, but also the recent social unrest, which created a sense of agency for government, for business, for labor movement, and civil society to come together and start really an honest, a candid discussion on a policy response, which we think can be formulated around a new social compact. We hope that this dialogue is going to be one of the many ways we can come together to really negotiate that new social compact. We are so happy to have a government official here who said we will come to listen in. We want to hear what civil society, what business, what labor movement want to really to bring as a new social compact. In light of the severity of poverty in this country, this dialogue will focus on examining the various issues that pertain to this problem. Among other things, this will include a discussion on various poverty reduction initiatives and strategies that have been introduced by the South African government since the advent of democracy, identify what has worked, but also what has not worked so that we can move forward. The specific objective for this dialogue include, among others, to frame the intervention to end extreme poverty with the stipulated national social compact. We also want to start a dialogue on a cross-sectoral approach to end poverty, restore dignity and well-being to the society. We want to conduct a critical review on the current policies and the strategies which has been there, so that we can provide policy options on a new approach to end poverty. So we have here invited experts in poverty alleviation. We have academics, we have civil society, we have business, labor movement, and government official whom we really want to put ideas together. We also wish that this dialogue can propose new solutions and also come up with real issues, because some of the problem we might have been tackling the wrong issues. When you are tackling the wrong issues, obviously the solution will be also not proper. So we want together to reflect on how we can build a new, resilient and sustainable social contract in South Africa. And I want to mention that this is also taking place during the Global Week to Act for the SDGs, where many global leaders are meeting in New York, where they are also part of the United Nations General Assembly. So we want to bring our voice to remind our institution, our government also, it's time now. We join people around. We are in solidarity to remind our world leaders about the SDGs and also about how we can really implement. We are left with less 9 years. We have given ourselves 15 years, but 5 years have gone and we are still far. So we also going to have a chart on how we can work together and come back to the SDGs. We cannot speak about the SDGs without mentioning the National Development Goals. We will also see, does it really still working, how far we have gone, and then among the solution, how we can fast track its implementation. Before we start, I want to mention that we have many civil society organizations represented here. We have religious movement, we have even grassroots communities, because we cannot say that we are bringing solution without people whom we are working for. We also want to hear their voices. We want to start, and but I want to ask Ms. Colleen Kobo from the Commission for Gender Equality for a welcoming address. And then we bring in our first panel. So that we can kickstart. Ms. Colleen.
Good morning, colleagues. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you so much, Joseph, and thank you to everyone who has made the time to be with us this morning. For me, it's really my opening remarks really about a reminder to all of us as to why the Sustainable Development Goals are important, and also how do they then become super important in how we do our work on a daily basis in terms of ensuring that we localize and implement the aspirations of the SDGs. So basically, I work for the Commission for Gender Equality. I'm responsible for the Western Cape province as the provincial manager there, but I'm also responsible for ensuring that the SDGs are actually localized nationally. So you will see in my introduction, I said I'm the organizational lead for localization of SDGs because I just wanted to frame why I will be speaking more on a national level rather than just only focusing on what the Western Cape can do as a province. So as a quick reminder, I just want to say SDGs were adopted by world leaders in September 2015, and they started being implemented as early as 2016. So if we look back, we can really say that we have had about 5 years of implementation, and what have we achieved? But that will also be informed by what we are going to be discussing. The SDGs came about to actually replace what we used to call Millennium Development Goals. And we have over 150 countries that have actually signed to this and pledged to say they will mobilize all efforts to end poverty, fight inequality, and tackle climate change while ensuring that no one is left behind. The SDGs built on the work of the MDGs that were emphasized between 2000 and 2015. What is unique about the SDGs is that they are broader in their scope of eradicating all forms of poverty, calling for action for all countries, rich and poor, to promote prosperity while protecting the planet. And it's actually for the first time that we have development goals that are so holistic in their framing and in how they want us to be working and implementing them. So for South Africa, this becomes very important because our SDGs are actually so aligned to the National Development Plan, the NDP, because the NDP also has a vision to have accomplished some objectives by 2030, and the SDGs are also earmarked up to 2030. So there's a real alignment when you look at what the SDGs are asking for and what the NDP is actually committed to doing. But then again, we then move again to provincial departments where you find the provincial growth and development strategies that again are also aligned to the bigger NDP, which is still 2030. And then they are now going to be cutting in chunks of 5 years to actually work towards 2030. And in that process as well, we then find districts and local municipalities that work with integrated development plans, where then at a local level, I, as a citizen of South Africa, get this well-integrated package that looks into poverty, climate change, the economy, and also protecting the planet itself. So that is where we are at. And this becomes very important because as we are moving towards the 1st of November, which is the election day for local government, so the package that we get as citizens becomes very important because at a local level, that is where our package comes from. So in this dialogue, it will be very important for us to reflect back and say, so what has been the package that ends poverty in my localization? And how do I want to envisage a better package that will really end extreme poverty? Because also with poverty, it doesn't mean that it's poverty because you did not have food today, but it's poverty in its wholeness, where we are also looking at issues like how does not having food contribute to child stunting, for example. And we know that currently South Africa has a growing number of children who are stunted. And if a child is stunted, it means then when they go to school and start education, they are not starting on an equal basis as a child who is starting school without having stunting as one of their nutritional challenges. So that again comes back to leave no one behind. So if there are children who are starting school at a level lower than other children, we're still feeding into the notion of leaving some people behind. So how do we use this dialogue to actually look at things like that, where equalness and starting on the same foot, or even holding some to get some to catch up with them, and then we move forward. Becomes a normalized discussion that we don't get into it by thinking, so who is the winner, who is the loser? I think it's about time we get to a point where the winner is the nation, and the loser is no one, basically, because that's what we want. We want a country where all of us are actually thriving and well in all our presentations. The second thing around poverty. Poverty feeds instability. It feeds unpeaceful societies. It feeds unsafe societies. So if we had done our fair bit in elevating and eradicating all poverty, we wouldn't be seeing the pockets of unrest that we see in our country, and particularly in the recent 2 months, what we saw happening in KZN and Gauteng was truly a reflection of how poverty comes out and show itself. And we start thinking, but those are not our citizens. Those are not people like us, but they are, just that they are on the other side of the coin where we are not seeing. So I really hope that also when we start dialoguing, we're also going to move beyond I think I like the word resilient, but for me, I think it's more about adaptability. So given how the challenge of COVID has challenged our poverty levels as South Africa, so we have shown that we can be resilient, which means we have coped. We are here today. But how do we move in this new social contract and be adaptable? By adaptable, not saying we normalize poverty, but we start knowing that poverty can be eradicated if me, myself, and I are also part of ensuring that it's eradicated. It's not about me waiting for someone who will come and take me out of the poverty, but it's me working with the systems and the system makers, ensuring that the system is not difficult for anyone to come into it and be able to get rid of the poverty that they might be experiencing. So for me, it is this big hope of a better situation beyond the pandemic. So the pandemic has shown us, given us a clear space to see that if poverty is not eradicated, this could be the norm. This could be what we see every day. So really going forward, I think poverty, inequality, and unemployment for me have become such a thing, like they're part of the narrative, almost like we are accepting and saying they form the characterization of our societies. But if we were to look from a hope beyond the pandemic perspective and say, what have we learned and how do we bounce back? So that's why I speak about adaptability rather than resilience. So how do we bounce back and actually leap to the next section? And we can only do that when we start being honest about taking social issues and using a more intersectional approach when we look at them. Because for me, this urban, rural, semi-urban type of approach that we only use somehow helps us not to get to where we're wanting. So if we were to take an individual and say, so what are the other factors that contribute to having this one individual still trapped in poverty, and simultaneously address all those issues while we work with that one individual, and start moving away from thinking they are blanket approaches. Like we will say, this is a rural poverty alleviation project. This is an urban poverty eradication project. Like those pocketing, and then not actually even looking at where did this person come from? Why do we find them here? What productive resources do they own? What productive resources do they have access to or not have access to? And what are the reasons that are behind that access or non-access of such issues? So for me, I'm calling that when we are doing this dialogue, we need to kind of look at it from an intersectionality approach and ensure that we then center in the center those who are most marginalized and most vulnerable. And those levels of vulnerability and marginalization, they move with how they then intersect with your age, your localization, your skin tone, your level of education, your level of owning things and access to things. So for me, it becomes very important that going forward, we really look at this more intersectional approach and take matters into consideration and almost really reconsider the blanket approach that we've been using in terms of trying to end poverty and act as if poverty is felt the same way for everyone in South Africa. So in closing, I wish all of us a fruitful discussion and also fruitful learnings from what we'll be sharing. I can see that we have quite a lot of colleagues, esteemed colleagues who know better and who have lived experiences that they can share with us onto how can we even begin to create that hope beyond the pandemic and actually allow ourselves to adapt and say this poverty is going to be totally eradicated by 2020, by 2030. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kolile, for setting the scene of this dialogue. And I really like the way you brought in poverty. Sorry, if we can all mute when we are not talking. I really like the way you showed how it is linked to other things happening in our society, such as crime, gender-based violence, but also I did like the way you brought in the period we are in of when political parties come every time the election is around. They come up with big plans. We have seen some yesterday and even the day before, big plans of changing South Africa, big plans of making now things happen and the focus on people. But at the end, we found we are on the same cycle. Things are not changing. So I hope really, thank you so much for bringing that. And I hope this conversation is going to come up with a clear propositions. For colleagues who just joined, we have just heard from our sister Kolile, who's the Commission for Gender Equality in the Western Cape and an active member of the South Africa Working Group. We now going to kickstart the conversation, but just to mention that this dialogue is hosted by the South Africa Working Group on SDGs. For some who may not have heard it, it's a working group which has representation from provinces and sectoral coalitions. We have been engaging the South African government on development and specifically on issue of implementation of the SDGs. We enjoy membership of major CSOs in many provinces, but also we work with labor movements such as COSATU, but also as you've noticed, we also work with a Chapter 9 institution, such as the Human Rights Commission, as well as a very good friend of the coalition, the Commission for Gender Equality. And then also, I want to also mention that some members of the civil society who might have seen that government also is so concerned about the issue of poverty. You have seen last week we were invited by the presidency, and then they've shared with us that they are also in the process of working on a new poverty alleviation strategy. So there is an interagency government task team which is working with a civil society in consultations and the National Planning Commission is also, we heard they are involved, the National Treasury, the Department of Social Development. So some of the issues which we'll bring here and solution will feed into that process. We attend the first meeting and we also make a formal submission. So we really hope that civil society can participate. You know, sometime as civil society, we are sometime of a view that there are serious constraints about the will and the capacity of state to lead a process such as this, a process about social compacting successfully. But we appreciate really that opportunity to input into this new strategy. Let's hope and invite everyone to take part. As we kick off the first panel, I will ask our panelists to be ready. I will be giving them 8 to 10 minutes for their opening remarks, and then we go into conversation, answering some questions from the moderator, but also questions which will come from participants. Let's use the chat room. And your moderator today is, my name is Joseph Eliapsan Maniragena. I'm the regional programs coordinator at African Monitor. So let's all engage together. The first panel is going to really assess the socio-economic situation in South Africa. As I mentioned, it's a candid conversation. Let's really, before we go to solution, let's really make a diagnosis like those made by doctors when someone is sick. Let's agree that our society has a problem. Let's agree that South Africa is not the South Africa we all wish to see. Then come up with, let's assess what are the real issues, then so that we can go to the solution. I would like to recognize the presence of Dr. Kefilwe Masteng, a very good friend of the civil society. We really do not take granted your support. She is the Deputy Director at the National Planning Commission, which is seated in the presidency. We really appreciate your presence, and we will also hear from her. We really appreciate your support, which we have been giving the civil society in South Africa. To most South Africa and some part of international community, for that matter, if we can go back in April 27, 1994, there was a lot of excitement. This is when South Africa finally emerged triumphantly from a modern century of apartheid oppression, which meant that there would be the advent of a new democratic political dispensation. What is even more impressive about what happened that day is that the political transformation which came was with minimal violence if we compare with other African countries. Hence, South Africa's democracy was held in high regard throughout the world, and especially in Africa continent. Notwithstanding this unique political transformation, however, the truth of the matter is that the first democratically elected government led by the African National Congress, the ANC, they have inherited a country that was described by the World Bank as one of the inequalities in the quality, it was described by the World Bank as the world's second most unequal economies. You can imagine the ANC-led government also inherited a country that was characterized by vast inequalities in education, healthcare, basic infrastructure, such as access to safe drinking, sanitation, and housing. Over and above, the country was disfigured by widespread poverty, with almost half of the South African population being categorized as poor in terms of national poverty line, even though such problems may have been common in many societies throughout the world. The uniqueness of South Africa situation was these problems were primarily engendered by 4 decades of apartheid. So now we are celebrating 27 years into democracy and the demise of apartheid. While we need really to recognize significant progress that has been made in education, healthcare, housing, provision of basic service, the general consensus is that poverty is still big in South Africa. Depending on the poverty line, the method employed, we all agree that it's a crisis or almost a crisis. So our panelists will help us really to get into the matter, to understand what is the real situation. Very recently, please if you can mute our mic. Very recently, I think late last year, the South African government released a reconstruction and the recovery plan, which brings on how we can recover from COVID. But what is clear, as we all speak about recovering, we're not going only to recover from COVID, but we'll be recovering from all those which did not go away in the past. So in order for the South African government poverty reduction strategy to be more effective, there is a need to be informed by what is meant by poverty in the South African context, what is the extent of this problem, how big is the crisis. Unless we know this and we understand, that's where now we can go to the solutions. I would want to invite our first panelist, Mr. David Francis, who's the Deputy Director at the Southern Center of Inequality Studies at the VIST. Please come in and help us to understand how big is the crisis, the economic crisis. But also, you may think maybe I'm asking a child's question. Are we in a crisis? Please, Mr. Francis.
Thanks, Joseph. I was wondering, can you give me hosts? I'd like to share some slides, if that's okay.
Yes. Second. Yes, you are now, you can share. And as you came in, really let me thank you so much for always being there for us. We really benefit from your support and your research, and we keep hoping that we keep working together in this work. Over to you, Mr. Francis.
Great, thanks, Joseph. Thanks so much for having me. Are the slides showing up? Can you see clearly?
Yes, we can see you at the presentation as well.
So as Joseph said, my name is David Francis and I work at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at WITS. I'm a labor market economist, so my interest is thinking about this question that Joseph posed about, are we in a crisis and how deep is it? I thought it might be interesting to look at some of the labor markets, poverty and inequality data that we have available, and to think about the question from that. So in the presentation, I'm going to think about and discuss a little bit why we should be worried about poverty and inequality, and that might seem obvious, but I think the magnitude and extent of both of those crises at the moment is acute, and we need to think more closely about it. And then the second one is, what can the labor market tell us about this crisis? So, there's many dimensions to our poverty and inequality crisis, but I think the labor market is at the key, or at the heart, at least, of many of South Africa's economic challenges. And it's particularly important given that the third leg of the crisis is unemployment. But in fact, poverty, inequality, and unemployment are mutually reinforcing crises. They're not distinct problems. I would argue that poverty and inequality, that crisis stems out of the crisis of unemployment. And so I think it's worth having a look at both employment and unemployment if we're going to think about poverty and inequality in the labor market. So where are we? I mean, to kind of directly answer Joseph's question, we're in a serious socioeconomic crisis. Before the COVID shock that we had a year and a half ago now, we had a high unemployment, possibly the highest in the world in terms of open unemployment. We had the highest inequality in the world, which we've called the inequality paradox, which is that we have this extremely progressive constitution that enshrines socioeconomic rights. It allows people to litigate for the realization of these rights. But yet we've seen in the post-apartheid period very little change in kind of the headline measure of inequality, which is the Gini coefficient, which looks at inequalities in incomes. But digging below just inequality in incomes, we have persistent inequality in wealth. Again, we have the worst wealth inequality in the world. We have persistent inequalities in race and gender. And thinking about employment and unemployment, we have persistent inequalities between those who work and those who don't, and also amongst those who work. Then to add to the problem, one of our success stories in the 2 decades of the post-apartheid period was that we managed to make sustained progress in reducing poverty by a number of measures: food poverty, poverty according to the lower and the upper poverty line. In the last 10 years, that's been reversed, and for the first time in the post-apartheid period, we're seeing poverty starting to rise again. So, and this is just overall to the country. There are, of course, regional variations, but it's a really significant negative that poverty has started to rise again. And then the final kind of context to note is that we have very low economic growth. And this is important because we've pinned a lot of our hopes of solving a lot of our economic problems on achieving economic growth. We have growth-led policy to both reduce poverty and unemployment, poverty and inequality, and reduce unemployment. And we've pinned our hopes on achieving economic growth, which, there's a debate about how we should be thinking about our development, but our development has been growth focused, but we haven't seen that growth materialize. We've grown very, very slowly, especially in comparison to lots of our similar countries. One of the results of that as well is that in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, we've seen per capita income start to decline again, which means that on average, every year for the last 5 or 6 years, each South African has become poorer than they were the year before. And that puts strain on a lot of different things that I'm sure we'll discuss a bit later. So this is just a representation of what I was saying earlier. The darker the green, the worse your income inequality. And you can see that South Africa, along with some of our neighbors, has the worst income inequality in the world. So this is all going into COVID. This data is all pre-COVID. We were already the most unequal country with the highest unemployment and growing rates of poverty. This is what I wanted to talk a little bit about before, again, we talk about the COVID problem. This is some data on our labor market from our labor market surveys from the 12 years from 2008 to 2020. And just a few things to highlight. First is that the number of employed people over that period grew by about 14%. We added 2 million jobs, 1.9 million jobs in the 12 years. But we added 2.7 million unemployed people to the 4 million that were already unemployed in 2008. So we had an almost 2/3 increase in the number of unemployed people in the last 12 years. And I think it's evident from that, the kind of level of crisis that we are dealing with. This graph just charts our unemployment rates in South Africa over the last 12 years. And you've seen that we've had accelerating or increasing unemployment, and the rate that it's increasing has started to accelerate, especially in the last 5 years. We see rapidly increasing levels of unemployment. This is up to the end of 2020, Q4 2020. We've now had 2 quarters of 2021 data that shows we're up to about 34.4% unemployment, which is clearly now the highest in the world. That takes us to somewhere over here, and we can see it's starting to almost look like a convex curve with an accelerating rate of unemployment. And I think it's quite clear the links between employment and poverty reduction. If you can have a job, that's one of the best ways to get out of poverty and to reduce inequality. But instead, we're seeing the opposite, that more and more people are being excluded from the labor market. But this is the unemployment rate, which is a ratio, right, of the number of people who have jobs out of the whole economy, or the whole labor force, rather. The other way to look at it is to think about employment. So this is a graph that shows us the actual number of people who were employed in South Africa between 2008 and the end of last year. And I think, again, this is a very visual representation of the crisis that we're in. So again, if we think of a job as a central way, not the only way, but as the central way to think about mitigating poverty and addressing inequality, there was some job growth up until the financial crisis started to bite, and we lost about 1 million jobs in South Africa over the financial crisis. Slowly, we managed to get those jobs back. Again, employment and unemployment can both grow at the same time because the labor force can grow faster than employment, and that's what's happened. We have been creating jobs between sort of 2010 and 2018, 2019. We added 3 million new jobs in the South African economy, which is a significant achievement. And then we see the COVID job losses. Lost almost 2.5 million jobs in the 3 months between March and June last year. And slowly that has been recovering. But even with the recovery towards the end of last year, we find we have the same number of employed people that we did in the first quarter of 2014, which we've erased basically 7 years of job creation. It's a serious problem. So this now is a little zoom in about what actually happened between the months before COVID and the months after. So we look at the first 3 months of 2020 and the last 3 months of 2020. And in that period, net, we lost 1.4 million jobs. So the number of employed people fell by 1.4 million. But the job losses are not shared equally amongst all the people who work. So we've seen from data that 2/3 of the job losses were women, only 1/3 was men. So there's been a significant gender component to the job losses that's really harmed women much more than men. The other is, as you can see here, those who work informally, and these are already, if you work in the informal sector, that's already a precarious place to work with low wages, low job security. People working in the informal sector lost jobs at twice the rate, 14% decline in jobs in the informal sector compared to 7% in the formal sector. So a serious there's inequalities in the way jobs were lost during the crisis. The last bit of data, I know there's lots of tables here, but the last bit of data I want to touch on was thinking about some of our sectors. So one of the things that we have done in South Africa is to think about ourselves as a continually industrializing country, and have pinned our hopes largely on developing manufacturing capability. We support our automotive sector for this reason, because manufacturing has lots of externalities that are really helpful when you're trying to promote economic growth. Having a growing manufacturing sector is key. The problem is the South African economy doesn't seem to be able to support a growing manufacturing sector. So even before COVID, from 2008 to 2020, the employment in manufacturing declined from 2.1 million to 1.7. So we lost 400,000 jobs in those 12 years. That's like a 20% decline in manufacturing jobs. And then lost another 215,000 jobs in manufacturing due to COVID. So we lost about 600,000 jobs in manufacturing. So instead of seeing manufacturing grow and supporting economic growth, because manufacturing jobs are very well paid compared to lots of other jobs, they have externalities that support the supply chain upstream and downstream. We're seeing the reverse. The manufacturing sector is continually shedding jobs, and it seems to be doing so at an even faster rate. Conversely, we've seen a lot of growth. We added 1 million jobs in community and social services, which are vital services for the economy, but as jobs are often characterized again by lower pay and higher precariousness than manufacturing. And so we've seen where we are creating jobs, we're creating them in an area that's less well paid and less secure than manufacturing. I see I'm almost out of time. So I wanted to, it's not a cheerful picture, but I think it's important to start these kind of discussions with an honest appraisal of the situation we're in. Just 3 or 4 take-homes from the data. The first is that the economic problem that we face is a gendered problem. I mentioned that women lost 2/3 of the jobs in South Africa over COVID. We need to really think about addressing gender inequality in our economy if we're going to make any sort of dent in this, because this triple challenge of poverty, inequality, and unemployment doesn't affect everyone the same. It affects women much more and continues to in the post-apartheid period. The second is that it seems now that time is running out to hope that we can get some things right in the economy and therefore create jobs. And perhaps we need to start thinking about how we can create jobs as a direct economic policy. And exactly how that would work, I think, is up for debate. But this link between we have economic growth and then we have industrialization and then we have job creation, it seems like we're running out of time to do that. And so I think we need to think and continue to think about the productive side of the economy. And by that we mean the real economy where manufacturing happens, farming, social services, retail, all of that. But we also need to think about distribution of what is generated in the productive economy. And there's increasing talks about universal basic income for those who can't find employment, and to support the whole economy universally. And I think those discussions are becoming more and more important. And I think the final point is to think, it's when you look at this data, it's obvious that there's systemic exclusion and inclusion in the economy. There's a group of people who have jobs, lots of them are paid very well, most of them aren't. And then you have a group who, it seems increasingly, will never be able to access employment. They'll never get a job. The longer you're unemployed for, the lower your chance, almost to zero, of getting a job. And up until now, there's been some sort of kind of social pact where those with jobs maintain the status quo with the offer that the unemployed will at some point get a job. And it seems increasingly that since that's not the case, maybe this is tipping the balance of that discussion, and we need to think a little bit more about a social pact that allows outsiders to participate much more in decision-making about the economy and also the economy itself. So I think, I'm out of time. I'll stop there. Thanks, Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. David, for this. And I'm looking at the picture you just painted. It doesn't really look good. And you have partly answered my question, whether we are in a crisis. 34% of unemployment, it's not good for a country like South Africa, with all we have, with the way the world takes us. But also the most sad thing is how the most affected, and you have confirmed that women are the most affected. And we know where women are affected, it's actually the whole family affected, the whole society. Thank you so much for this. But I know you have indicated constraint in time. You may not be available for the whole dialogue. But before I let you go, and I see the comment, I was expecting that comment from Gender Commission, that this is really a gendered problem. It's a crisis with deep systemic exclusion and keeping people on the margin. This is from scholar from CGE. Before I let you go, how do we really address the systemic exclusion in the economy?
Thanks, Joseph. I mean, that's the impossible question to answer, in terms of a set of policies. But I would say that what we need to do is acknowledge that we can't keep trying the same thing and hoping that it's going to solve the problem again. I think we've seen over the last 30 years, we basically suggest the same type of interventions at the same scale and systemic level and hope this time that they're going to work and snap us out and create jobs. And I think if we now very quickly running out of time, that's the option of trying that one more time is foreclosing on us. And we need to think about something more radical or more systemic or both, or more wide-ranging. We can't keep proposing the same marginal policy interventions, tweaking here, tweaking there, thinking that it's going to kickstart things. I think we need a radical change, and that needs to be implemented across a whole lot of different things. And that doesn't mean that each policy needs to be radical per se, but that we need an overhaul of a whole lot of areas of the economy and of policy in a way that helps us to try and make some progress, because I think we're not only making slow progress, we're going backwards in many ways, and we've run out of time to wait and see any longer.
Thank you so much. Thank you really for this. Let me bring in Professor Alexi Abiaremie. He's from the University of Johannesburg. He's actually the senior researcher at the South African Research Chair in Industrial Development at the School of Economics at the University of Johannesburg. And as we keep on really digging deeper to try to understand what are the causes, why this picture, which Francis just painted, despite all effort undertaken in the past, we seem really not able to eradicate poverty in South Africa. And things, even when I was looking at the chart, there's a time where we're really doing well, but then after a few years, we went down. Prof. Alexi, I remember when I was inviting you to this dialogue, we had a long discussion on what are the real issues, but also the real issues. Could you help us to understand that?
Thank you very much, Joseph, for giving me the opportunity to talk. You know, when he invited me, I resisted several times because I realized that this issue is highly contentious. But as the previous speaker has said, we have always tended to repeat the same mistakes again and keep hoping that we will get a solution. And I did not want to come to express the same ways of thinking. And I was just afraid that my response will be too confrontational. And so I just want to warn everybody here that my thoughts may seem very radical. So I will be speaking on my own behalf. I'm not an inequality or poverty scholar. I'm not speaking on behalf of the university, just as a Arabic-speaking Turkish gentleman working in South Africa and living in Belgium. That's all the credentials with which I want to be heard here. I'm not South African, so I can speak freely. The problem, the major problem here is looking at poverty as an economic phenomenon that can be solved with economic solutions. The reality is that poverty in this country has been engineered, has been created by legislations that created the dispossession of people, deprived them from their means of production. And when you have a population with an unemployment rate of above 30%, not for 1 year, not for 2 years, not for 3 years, but for more than 20 years, we're not longer talking about a crisis. This is not a crisis. A crisis is something that happens, and then there is a break, and then you can restore. How can you talk about a crisis when a country lives in this situation for more than 20 years? It's we should actually not be thinking rationally about this. We should all be angry and upset that the political class can live with poverty, can live with those levels of inequality for almost 30 years and think that they can just go about business as if those problems had not been created, explicitly created by legislation, which you can reverse by other legislations. And one of the most important things that I want to underline here is that it almost goes beyond understanding that the political class here wants to hire academics that go and analyze poverty on their behalf and tell them what poverty is before they can understand and possibly do something about it. If you are a political leader and you do not know what poverty is, and you don't know what the causes of poverty are in this country, you should go out of the way because you are part of the problem and not part of the solution. Just to give an example, you know, the People's Republic of China is hailed as the country that managed to lift 800 million people out of poverty. 800 million. Just the idea of it is the whole population of Europe, plus the whole population of Russia, plus the whole population of Turkey, plus the whole population of Iran and Syria and Egypt. How did they manage to do that? Because they understood what poverty is. The leaders do not have to commission the graphs and the statistics from the universities to understand poverty. They know, they have lived in poverty, they have lived in the countryside with the poor, and the current leader of the People's Republic of China even wrote a book about poverty. It's called Bai Toping. So in not one single graph, because he has lived in poor communities for many, many months and he understands it. Now, the situation that we have is beyond a crisis. And if we keep talking about a crisis and solving the problem with graphs and statistics, by the way, if we talk about statistics, the problem of poverty is much, much bigger than what is shown by the statistics of this unemployment rate and the poverty line. The reality is that when you go to the poverty lines in South Africa, you will get something like almost 50% of the people in the rural areas that are affected by poverty, but 26% more are vulnerable to falling back into poverty, even though they are above the poverty line, which means that 76% of the South African people are directly threatened by poverty. In such a situation, having rich academics telling rich politicians what poverty is in the hope that one of these two is going to do something about it is something that we should all be furious about. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Dr. Alexis. And actually, you just brought in other kind of information that we are not actually in the crisis. The crisis is deeper than we thought. And you also brought the issue of even that the rate we see in the statistic we see may really be higher than we thought. Thank you so much. And we keep, I will bring you in when we start coming up with what we do. How do we come now after what we have heard, after we all know, what do we do from here? Let me bring in Ms. Colette Letojan. Mrs. Colette, she's the Executive Director at Human Rights Institute of South Africa, HURISA. Mrs. Colette, she has over 20 years experience in human rights law, and she's a very active member of the South African Working Group. We always run to her for support, and we really don't take granted your support. And could you come in and we spoke about the gender issue, but could you come in, help us to understand how deep is the gender-based violence is, and then also how peace and security issue situation is, so that once we now start talking about poverty, because we saw that poverty brings and is linked to many other social ills we face in our society. and no one here can really is proud of how we are doing when it comes to gender equality, but also it's so sad. It's even a shame how women have lost hope in this beautiful country. Mrs. Colette, please come in and help us establish this.
Good morning to you, Mr. Moderator, Joseph, and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen.
You're not muted.
I'm not muted. Am I loud?
If you are not muted.
I'm not muted.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not muted. Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I understand that there are officials here, so we appreciate their presence here. It's always good to share experiences, to have this dialogue that engages officials as well. In that way, we make progress. Looking at the situation of poverty in South Africa, which is now described as the phenomenon of poverty in South Africa, like the manifestation of poverty, it has become so close to our challenges that it becomes our identity. It becomes our characteristic that poverty will always be part and parcel of our lives, despite the fact that it's something that we'll always remember. Its historical legacy that it was left in taking over the country in the new democratic spaces, what promises, commitments were made to address the economic imbalances, inequalities of apartheid, with very progressive policies. And that inequality that we had inherited from the past, it was not even making inroads regarding the vulnerables, women being part of that, and other groups, LGBTI, the elderly, people with disability, the youth and children, they were right at the bottom of the list. Now, we have seen progressive efforts made to overcome the status quo, especially when you look at the living law versus policy. The living law seems to be very deep-rooted to the extent that how policy measures were created and implemented, it became very, very difficult because there were some hurdles and stumbling blocks that impedes, that prevents, smooth enforcement. One of this is that the proper management of resources and even budgeting, when you want to address gender-based or gender inequality in the country, the budget models need to give, a proper, commitment, ensuring that we are really addressing and we understand the deep-rootedness of gender. What is gender-based or gender inequality, and then its manifestation in gender-based violence, for example, where it comes from and how we address that. It has left a lot of elements which we are currently battling with now. You'll find that we have National Action Plan for development, for National Development Plan of Action, which is also aligned to the global commitment, development of 2030, to achieve all the poverty and the challenges by 2030. You find that we have not even addressed gender. What are the manifestations? What are the problems? political will comes in, because there's a blindfolding or lack of seriousness in really taking gender inequality very, very seriously. The programs right now, we have national strategic plan to address gender-based violence 2020 to 2030. The budget that we have is 1.41 or 46 million rands. That budget is to assist organizations across the country, mainly women that are running these programs, to spearhead the national strategic plan programs. Those programs, they contain justice, intersectionality, and poverty as well, and education. Those programs are not being implemented. Women are not able to carry out, let alone to popularize, to educate communities about this national strategic plan, its aim and its objectives, and how it can make meaningful impact for the grassroots communities, women living in rural areas. There has not been any meaningful impact or progress made to educate communities, to even translate the document into local languages. The resources and the governance structures which were supposed to be established, there's been delay in ensuring that that governance structure operates, monitors implementation of the national strategic plan. We now have laws that the president has also signed, those laws that we're long awaiting for. Those laws, they need to be popularized, and education and capacity building be provided to law enforcement, your police, your justice, your judges, your prosecutors, your magistrate. That process as well, it will take many generations, because issue of budgeting or issue of resources has been a major problem. It's either we manage to get the resources that are needed, and inside government institutions, we are not having good oversight mechanism or check and balances. Treasury, I remember the former Minister of Finance once mentioned in one of his reports that if Treasury is manipulated or is overpowered to the extent that it cannot regulate money, ensure that resources end up in good hands, in hands that will trickle down the resources to where they're supposed to be, we have a serious problem in the country. How we dish out big, we have trillions and trillions of resources that have disappeared in hands of the very same officials that are appointed or tasked with huge responsibility to address the imbalances, the economic imbalances of the past, mainly to address challenges that women are facing. We know that majority of women are unemployed. When we speak about that statistics of 42% of unemployment, we know over 50% of that, it speaks to women. And women in rural areas do not have the necessary infrastructure. There is no infrastructure that enable them, for example, internet, which we are now having the opportunity to be online. How many of them can access some of the processes? How many of them are supported? There is no infrastructure, or it has dilapidated. If we say there is no maintenance of infrastructure. Education system, the quality of education has deteriorated, and the safety and security of women to participate in processes, even in politics. Right now, we are in the season of local government election, and we know that the women that were supporting their own political party campaigning, supporting initiatives that were taken there, their life was put to risk by the shooting that has taken place. So reprisals continue to undermine delivery of some of the processes and increasing this gap of poverty. And we know when we speak about that increase, we speak about number of women that are affected, number of women that continue to become the victims of poverty, the victims of unemployment, and the victims of violence. We do not have enough health facilities or services that are reaching communities in rural areas. Women in rural areas, for example, when we even look at issues pertaining to land, they remain without land. There's recent case that have really succeeded in ensuring women do not pay land. You know, they are supposed to pay rental actually in rural areas. This is the KZN Ngonyama Trust matter, which it was successfully favored the women in that province, not to be imposed what is it, cost to pay rental where they are unemployed. So the issue of land, although we are talking about land will be returned back to people without compensation, the process remained very unclear, and women in most of the provinces in rural areas are without land. They are working on the ground in agriculture. They need to be supported with the funds, the loans. They are required to support collaterals. Women do not have those kind of collaterals that are required. And then also they are access to justice, for example, if they have to bring matters to court, they do not have choices of court. If a matter relates to traditional issues, the new, why I forget this bill, this bill that has been reinstated back. I know the CGE did advocate against this traditional courts bill, which limit access to justice for women, that you do not have a choice to go to other courts like the High Court. You are limited to remain, you can't opt out. So the practice that we inherited from apartheid, we do not open our mind to address it in a holistic manner, to free women from being burdened with house chores that are unpaid, and also in places of work to receive equal pay with their counterpart. So there is a big marginalization, approaches that we see that are addressed in a middle peace type of way, that is seen to be benefiting certain groups, as mainly the male persons. And we are making less progress with all the progressive laws that we have, and then national action plans that do not have adequate resources, that remain far-fetched processes, because women and the society at large are unaware and do not understand how to enforce or access their right. I'll remain here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Colette, for that. And you really brought a picture of issues of corruption and coordinated programs, but the issue of good programs, but less implementation. And your suggestions also were noted. In 1 minute, could you help us, before we move to the second session, as civil society, how should we respond to the current state of affairs in our country?
Well, the National Action Plan provides a very good strategy here of 4 elements. One is participation, prevention, and what is it called, recovery and livelihoods. So now, in terms of participation, we will need to familiarize ourselves with the laws that we have in the country, and ensuring that, playing that oversight role, making sure that the laws that are adopted, they incorporate human rights. You know, we have human rights approach to all the laws, to all the policies that are adopted. And then we monitor the process. Right now, then NSP must really fast track the setting up of the governance, because if we do not have the governance in this national strategic plan, we are missing out. And if we do not advocate or campaign for more funding, there is no way that over 2,000 civil society organizations that are working on GBV can share the 1.4 million, which is currently being made available through donations. So we are calling and encouraging our partners, especially male counterpart, to be part and parcel, you know, to find innovative ways of helping us mobilize resources, because without resources, you know, there's little that we can do. Education, we are running educations, you know, to simplify this NSP for civil society. We already have a National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, also about to be translated into local languages, and we will be running educational programs. But I think right now we need to come out of our comfort zones. Let us come out of our comfort zones and you know, be vigilant to find out who's doing what, and to share as much information as possible, and you know, work in collaborations. Collaborations such as this one is very key, and we need to continue doing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the great advice, because we cannot be seen providing advices to government but then as civil society, we are not united. We are also not putting our voice together. So thank you so much for that. We'll be going to the second panel. Thank you so much to the first panel. The second panel, we are now going to speak about how do we formulate the new social compact on ending extreme poverty. You may want to ask, why do we keep on speaking a new social compact? The president of South Africa, President Ramaphosa, recently called for a new social compact. We are now unpacking it. How should it look like? What should be part of it? How do we come together on the same table, speaking truth to each other? Otherwise, if we're not honest on the table, it means we're going to come up back with same strategies which did not work. Dr. Alexis mentioned it, that we sometimes keep on coming on issues on things which did not work, and we expect different solution. So we need really to change here. But before I bring in the second panel, which will be made by Dr. Masiteng from the National Planning Commission, Ms. Simi Siwisa from the APSA Group, Ms. Christina Van Straten from the Studies in Poverty Inequality Institute, and then Mr. Bradley Chabalara from the South African Small and Medium Enterprise Corporation, as well as again Dr. Alexi Habiyaremye from the University of Johannesburg. Let me ask first Mr. Yared to come in and take less 5 minutes, speak to us about this week, the Global Week for Sustainable Development Goals, but also speak to us, share with participants here about the plan the South Africa Working Group have with the upcoming SDG Club Symposium 2021. But also, where does this conversation and the policy briefs which will come from this, where do they look like, where are they going to end? So that we know that this is not just another talking dialogue where we come up with big plans, but nothing is being implemented. Over to you, Mr. Yared. Mr. Yared Tsega is the director at African Monitor. Yes, over to you, Mr. Yared. Check if your mic is not on mute.
On these children. Eh?
Mr. Yared, we cannot hear you.
Oh, I think it's
If we can, if we're not speaking, please let's mute. And let me also motivate, encourage participants, please type comment and suggestions as well as question in the chat box. And the team is also putting together, the team which is putting together the report, will take note. We will also have a time for questions and comment, but we will appreciate if these can be already shared in the comment section, in the chat box. Over to you, Mr. Yared. We can see the presentation, but we cannot hear you. Shall we come back to you after the second panel? It seems Mr. Yared is having a technical problem. Okay, do we have a burning question to the first panel before we move to the second panel? One person or two who may have really a question which cannot wait to the end, you have 30 seconds to pose the question. Do we have someone who have a quick question to the first panel? I see Pastor Lebo Kandimang. You want to say something to Colette? Oh, it was just a greeting. Otherwise, there's a comment from Sin
Hello?
Sandman.
Hello?
Yes, Pastor Lebo?
Hello? Yes,
We can hear you.
Joseph?
Yes,
Hello?
Pastor Lebo, we can hear you.
Yes? Yes, yes. Yes, Tandwasame. I just wanted to highlight something to Colette regarding now on the issue of the GBV. Can you hear me?
We can hear you very well from Free State, right?
Okay. No, from Northern Cape. From
Northern Cape. Yes, Northern
yes,
Cape.
Kuruman, yes, Kuruman, yes. I just wanted to highlight something to Colette regarding now on the issue of the GBV and to all the stakeholders. She mentioned about the 1.4 million donation that still needs to be shared amongst the community-based organization. And from the findings, as I'm also one of those organization project manager who has been running up and down in schools on the child youth development, especially on the GBV, the extensiveness of this gender base is very rife. And I still want us to get even more support of financial aid and resources, especially for us coming from the rural district. Kuruman is a very, very rural region that there's so much, there's so many, we don't have much of resources, and we need everyone to come on board to assist us to bring healing to these children, to this youth, especially in schools. So I just wanted to find out from Colette that now, what will be the way forward? Because now if there's violence, poverty also strikes. And if poverty strikes now, it's something else. It brings so much immorality, and it lessens even the good quality education that these kids can attain from the schools. There's so many findings and observations that I have on my run. I have the findings that I have come up with this whole program on the issues, that real issues that still needs more attention, and then now for us to eradicate some of the poverty issue. I think that I must send you an email so that I can make sense out of this, because now I'm getting so emotional and overwhelmed when I come to speak
Thank you,
about this.
Pastor.
Yes,
I'll
it is
give
very
you
serious.
Colette's email. Colette, do you want to
Yeah.
come in just in less 1
It is
minute?
so painful, Joseph. It is very painful.
I
And
hear
the
you.
little resources that you that the donors or the supporters are giving us, it doesn't bring any impact. And there's no way that we can eradicate poverty if now we don't come up with sustainable implementation initiatives. That is what I'm trying to say to Colette.
Thank you so
We need
much.
to come on board and see what is the way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Colette, do you want to respond quickly?
Yeah, thank you very much. We share the same sentiment, Pastor. We have not been, comfortable hearing that actually there's 1.4 million to cater for, mobilized for supporting civil society with the Solidarity Fund. As you remember that the president even mentioned that COVID-19 is a share, GBV is a share of COVID-19. So the budget that we have it's not even a percentage of what was provided to curb COVID-19. So we need to mobilize. I think we need to engage the Department of Women, people with youth, people with disability, and come up with some they need us to be innovative, because there is no resources. And I don't know who will benefit. I didn't even want to submit my proposal. Although we are doing the work, most organizations are doing work on voluntary basis. Women are expected to carry out all these duties from home level. It's not paid, and it's not acknowledged. At workplace, we have read with much interest. I think 2 weeks ago, there was an expert who was giving us statistics on the percentage that women are paid. It's like 30% less than their male counterpart. So all that discrimination, disparity, has been carrying on for so long that we need to really overhaul everything and stop this marginalization and perpetuation of the stereotypes at private, even at home level, regardless of the labor, regardless of your qualifications, regardless of the time and efforts that women, even now, we are playing instrumental role when they are mobilizing people for supporting their campaigns, their manifesto. Who is there in big numbers? I think this enslavement mentality that we see in the country, we need to find a way of conscientizing everyone. We need to mobilize, do fundraising. I was suggesting that how about we call for every individual, to contribute, even if it's 100, 10 rand, 20 rand a day or a month or a week or something that can go into the program, because there's nothing that can be done. I don't know how many are going to benefit, and if they benefit, it will be shared. So they'll get about 200, 150, which does not take them anywhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those suggestions. Noted. I think Mr. Yared is ready. You can now take the 5 minutes, then we move to the next session. Colleagues, we are on social media as well. Let's use the Twitter handle, the African Monitor, and Facebook to keep on sharing this. The Twitter handle is @African Monitor. A is capital and M is capital. African Monitor. The Instagram is the same, African Monitor, as well as the Facebook. Please let's share what is we think should be the solution, but also let's tag the individuals, our leaders, institution, which we think they can do something about this. Thank you so much. Over to you, Mr. Yared.
Joseph, can you hear me?
We can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you so much. I will speak shortly, probably less than 5 minutes, on the Open SG Club 2021 or 2022, depending on the election period. And I think I want to speak why we are having this conversation today. So basically, when we look at the impact and implication of COVID-19, we can see the regression on goal 1, which is probably the topic of today. There are regression on goal 5, especially around gender-based violence. I think our colleague has just presented on the unemployment figures. And then on goal 16, our colleague Corlett has been speaking on that just now. So those are the 5 issues where we think that there is a regression. And I think with the latest social unrest, I think there is a glaring this social national food plans we've been witnessing. And as well, the current approach to poverty reduction, I think we mostly got to do with cash transfers or the form of social grant. I think we will have that conversation later on, but there is this sense that this is not translated to building inclusive and sustainable livelihood. So those are some of the issues which we've been looking at. The other is obviously in terms of processes. Last Friday, at least as we are aware of, that the president has kick-started a consultation on poverty and unemployment. I think a lot of civil society colleagues participated last Friday's conversation. And I think it's very important for us as civil society to work together and probably make some tentative input to such processes, rather than just attending such consultations, but if and when could prepare a written comment or submission to the presidency on this process. I think that's one of the ideas when we decided to host this session. The second issue is I think the president has been very, very vocal around calling for new social compact. The ruling party is very vocal. Various stakeholders in the country looking for new social compact, and those are the issues which we look at when we look at Open SG Club 2021, to look at various processes nationally, and then how do we respond to those national processes, as well as looking at the global processes as well. So this year's Open SG Club, one of the main areas is we will focus on institutionalization of the multi-stakeholder approach to SG delivery by generating impulses for the establishment of National Development Stakeholders Forum. I think, as you may be aware, that last year we worked on developing that specific proposal of the National Development Stakeholders Forum, and this year we will push for its institutionalization. The main area, as I have indicated, is formulating the social compact framework in line with the whole society approach, which has been underlined by 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We are looking for sort of pillars. Pillar 1 will be a composition around ending poverty. Pillar 5 on gender. The second pillar will be on goal 5 around gender equality and women's empowerment. The third pillar will be decent work and inclusive growth, and the last pillar will be inclusive and civil society. So if and when we continue this conversation on social compacting, we will be speaking on each issue. Today we will be dealing on the first pillar on goal 1, but going forward we will be having similar engagement on gender equality, especially focusing on the violence part of it, and then probably we will move on working with COSATU on decent work and inclusive growth, and then the last process would be on goal 60. So we will bring all this together during the symposium period. So the general, so the sort of some specific objectives is we plan to develop a roadmap on establishment of the National Development Stakeholders Forum, and then obviously host a symposium basically to create a platform of multi-stakeholder dialogue in the country. And then I think the last element is around the voluntary national review. At this point in time, we don't have the information, but it could possibly that the country may be hosting a voluntary national review next year. If and when that happens, then probably civil society need to prepare. So this is just a quick input to give you the framing or the general idea of where are we moving as the South Africa Working Group on SDGs. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you so much for keeping time. Colleagues in the civil society, you can see that we have big plans, but we cannot really achieve them without us working together. Let's work together, let's really partner so that we can be able to say, at least at the end of this year, we have managed to achieve this. Then we have managed to collaborate with government, but also we have provided input in the new poverty alleviation strategy. Thank you so much, Yared. Let's now go, we are now 10 past 12 and we have to finish by 10 to 1. So we're going to quickly to the next session. We just we now have at least a little understanding of what are the issues. But we all agree that poverty is a multidimensional phenomenon, which to tackle it, we need different ideas. So this panel is going to be to go a little bit deeper to understand the inequality phenomenon, but also to try to discuss frame the social, the new social compact which is being suggested. We also had some example, for example, from China, who have managed to eradicate poverty of 8 million were lifted from the extreme poverty. And we all agree that really on this issue, China and the many Asian countries are really doing well. So we're going to start to try to learn from them and come up with some policy suggestions. Let me bring in Dr. Masiteng, who's the Deputy Secretary for Planning at the National Planning Commission in the Presidency. Dr. Masiteng, could you share with participants what is the general plan from government to end poverty at the planning level?
Good day, and thank you very much always for inviting us to communicate with everybody and making sure we are on the same understanding in terms of matters poverty and inequality. I will try and see if one can try and share slides. How much time do I have so that I can move faster? I can try and do this in a maximum of 10 minutes.
Yes, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think of critical importance is that South Africa has had this journey, and it is encompassed within the understanding that South Africa has always been at the forefront of these discussions. And it adopted its national development plan even before the continent and the SDGs were adopted. Therefore, I think from the planning and understanding of the problems, South Africa has been ahead. But I think the major issue is the understanding that at the country level, we want to reduce poverty and inequality, and seeing that the critical determinant to this has always been unemployment. But the continent would like to develop a prosperous Africa that is based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. Same dream as the country would have wanted. And the world would like to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all. So we all want to do away with poverty. We all want to see a prosperous country, continent, and the world. And I guess one of the critical issues is that these are mutually reinforcing agendas that support sustainable development. But having said that, I think the critical issue becomes our ability to understand that this work to be done requires us to see longer, to expect the results to come and work towards the results. Because to reduce poverty and extreme inequalities, to ensure that there's growth and development and strengthening institutions, to build the nation and to have a developmental state, these are all long-term projects. And a single term of government or any 5 years would not be able to get us to this. Therefore, what we need to sustain is our journey to the long-term results, so that we don't change results every 5 years, or when we think we are failing, we change, or when we think we have not yet met what we had dreamt to meet, we already change. So if we change every time, the dream becomes new. When the changes are there, we change every time. Therefore, the results will always also take longer to be met. But the critical issue is that we have always struggled to have this longer term thinking. If you look at the SDGs, they have the same term, but with the Agenda 2063, we can have about the next 9 5-year periods to take us there. So we should be able to be strong on the thinking about the medium-term thoughts that should also be strengthened by the short-term thoughts that still take us to the longer-term dreams. We don't have to change every time. When implementation has not happened, we change. When we have not succeeded, we change. We just need to work stronger to our dreams. But I think what South Africa has not also looked at is that we have started in 2012, we were looking at 2030, but there are many other plans that are underway and are trying to take us there. And we are moving with these 5-year plans. We should be able to see and force the successes of the 5-year plans to be able to take us to the remaining 2 5-year periods, up to 2024 and the 2024 to 2029, which will already tell us where we are in terms of moving towards 2030. If we are able to move within those lines, we would be able to be thinking ahead, sustaining what we thought was the dream and not changing the dreams. And the critical problems that South Africa remained with, and they remain with today, too few jobs, divided communities, we are riddled with corruption as a country. We need to build a capable state for South Africa to be able to deal and rid of poverty and inequality, so that we have a government that is efficient, that is able to lead development in our country. Part of the high burden disease has just been exacerbated by COVID that we sit with today. And we still have spatial divides, which is the history that we have come up with, and we still have a long way to deal with. We have a highly resource intensive economy that we need to really deal with the structural problems and challenges of growing our economy, because it leaves others behind, even intentionally, in the manner in which I think somebody said the laws that are in place have a way of sustaining, leaving others behind, and we continue to have a crumbling infrastructure. These are just the external issues that we should understand, that even if we want to deal with the country issues, there are also these external issues that also affect how we move forward. But the critical issue that we want to see, if we need to move forward in the long term, we should see the raised living standards of the people in our country through increased and improved inclusivity to the growth. Employment should improve. We should see social wage that is able to provide a flow of social protection and good quality of public services. This should be interlinked with improved education, incomes that raise and broadening the opportunities for everybody in the country. So key to this is to build capabilities of the people to fend for self, to ensure that they are able to hold themselves, to improve their lives, and also the state that is able to have a capability and capacity to organize itself to ensure developmental planning in the country and the economy that is able to grow and is inclusive. At the heart of this is that South Africa should have, somebody spoke to the leadership. It should be very strong, cohesive, and collective. We should have a government that is effective to implement and lead. At the heart of that is active citizenry, at which we look at the coordination and bringing together by the civil society as an active citizenry. Now, these are the goals that we have also wanted to meet. We have not met them, we know. As it is, we are moving even further and further away from the goals of 2030. And what we are saying is that we saw poverty decline around 2011, but it has stalled thereafter. We are sitting at this 40% of the people that are below the living poverty line that we have said. We are not comparing very well with the other countries. Everybody has seen a decline in terms of the reduction in poverty, but everything has been reversed. Inequality in South Africa continues to be high. And yes, as far as money and income is concerned, we are one of the highest highly unequal countries. And reduction has been too slow that I think we are even back to what we thought would have been the target that we want to reverse. Jobs have not been able to be created, and we will not be able to meet the targets that we want, whether for SDGs, for Agenda 2063, or SDGs or NDP by 2030. And the unemployment of 34.4% is just exacerbating, and COVID is also going to make sure that it is going to be harder to get to the targets. But because it is an aspiration, it is a dream, the country still has the imperative to commit to full employment. Therefore, the country should dream bigger, the country should work harder towards the targets and be able to open the economy, create jobs, and that is the primary and critical part that needs to be done. The economy should be able to be inclusive. It has been very slow, and the capacity also of the economy has fallen over the years. And of critical importance on the economy is to ensure that the economy is able to inclusively deal with those issues that make others be able to get into the economy and others are remaining outside. The critical structural issues of the economy, of competition, the critical structural issues of the economy, of making sure that we create jobs in the small and medium enterprises should be taken to heart. So moving very fast forward, we should be able to have these issues around health, to build human capabilities and improve the quality of life. We should build the education sector and transform human settlements. We should build the capabilities also to ensure that social protection is the order of the day in the medium to the long term for our own country. We need a capable, ethical, and developmental state. On this one, we know our challenges. Corruption at the heart of it, the problem of having the issues of political and administrative and interfaces that still need to be done. While there has been progress that has been done, there are high crime levels, segregation continues, trust level has also now started to fall because people do not see development, others continue to be left behind. What do we need to do? I think of critical importance is our ability to implement better towards 2030. Moving from here, there should be focused issues that say successful implementation depends on availability of resources. Those that need to be able to implement should have the resources. We should recognize the prevailing constraints, but be able to make trade-offs, prioritize, and make sure that there is optimal fiscal stance. We should do this in partnership, co-ownership, and collaboration. It should be a whole of government and a whole of society approach, everybody. And when we talk about this, we know the role that the civil society can play for bringing society and working from community development, working with the people, bringing people to the fore. And while we speak this big English, we know that there are practical things that can be put into the fore because we have the civil society that works close with the people. And we should be able to prioritize. We need to be focused over the next 9 years and not over change and shorten change towards what goals we want to get, and clearly monitor what we have said and institutionalize the thinking around the better lives for all, for the country, but also making sure that implementation of SDGs, NDP, Agenda 2063 is about the plan for the country, not the plans for government alone. Critical issues that we really need to look into is to ensure that we have stability in our institutions. We should deal with better coordination across with people and to implement better. Focused leadership is required. The plans that we implement in the country should be for, about, and with the people, and not just government alone. And I think critical issues there would be about monitoring and evaluation. That should be at the heart of it, but it should be that all social partners to collectively measure NDP implementation and ensure that it's a joint up government approach, but everybody working together. And that issue that was raised about oversight bodies should be played to an extent that everybody would know as oversight bodies, where are we with Agenda 2063? And where are we with SDGs? And if we implement the NDP correctly, we will be able to be moving towards the goals that we have been talked about. The coordination mechanism that starts and tries to bring everybody together in terms of the National Sustainable Development Stakeholder Forum should start to work and make sure that that is where the dialogue, the conversation, and the policy formulation, review, and moving forward is done in practical ways. And when we do this, we need to see that we have the National Development Plan at the heart of it. In the country, we can deal with MTSF, provincial growth, the district growth, or DDM, or IDPs, but also we work at the heart of that, ensuring that what we do in the implementation of the NDP should be able to assess how we are doing regionally, how we are doing continentally, and how we are doing when we are compared to the rest of the world in an integrated and collective manner. Conclusively, we should be able to understand there has been slow progress, and therefore that will also be slow progress towards SDGs and Agenda 2063. There has been underperformance of the country, and I think if the country says it itself, it would be the country that starts to dream bigger, that says we massify, we have to scale up in whatever we do. Social protection, I think we have learned from what COVID has done. It has started to critically make us understand that the social aspects of the population remain critical on how we can improve. Issues health, issues education should be put to the heart because they had progressed, but they started reversing when COVID came. And I think we need to be at heart saying jobs need to be created. And when that happens, the overall priority to accelerate economic recovery and reconstruction in the short term in the country should be driven through dreams that make sure that bring everybody to the board. If anybody can be able to participate in the labor market, let them be brought with whatever the skills that they have so that the economy can grow, we can recover, but we cannot recover leaving everybody behind. And I think of critical importance that needs attention is the capacity and the role of the state to ensure that there's proper leadership. And I think in having said this, I would like to stop at that and say it is about better collaboration, better partnerships, working together, bringing everybody back on board, and we will together work on what we call the better implementation of the NDP over the period 2021 to 2030, and making sure that when we talk NDP implementation, it is not government, it is the rest of society, it is all of society. When all these things are done, if we look at what we always work towards, everything that we do is to be able to be done, putting everybody together to take us to 2030. Any programs, any projects, and everything that we do as individuals, as society, as communities, as organizations, as private sector, as civil society, as government, should be able to take us to the reduction of poverty and inequality. But at the heart of it, let's create the jobs for the 12 million people that we have already seen are the ones that are pulling the country down in terms of its implementation for development and sustainable development in the country. For all of us, taking it together, I think the major issue now is holding heads together, everybody playing their role. But also when we do it together, collaborate, there is collective leadership and the results can be better. Thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Masiteng, for bringing in this long-term planning perspective, and also really going through the NDP. How did we go? How far did we go? But also, I like the way you also acknowledged what did not go well, and also what needs to change. You rightly acknowledged that there was a weakness in implementation and coordination. And also, I like your suggestion at the end. There's one question for you from Skolile. We'll just say, Dr. Masiteng, thank you for your presentation. What is your view in employment, a solution for eradicating poverty, or is creating and supporting sustainable livelihood a solution? Job creation seems to be the buzzword. What are the lessons from an economic perspective for a developmental state such as ours? And then also, when you come in, could you also address, there have been critics of the NDP that it's a good plan, but it looks more as a wishful, without really a clear and the feasible implementation plan. What do you respond to those critics? Because people think there is still missing of that the NDP does not want to dismantle or to shake things. We spoke earlier on about a big number of people have been excluded in the economy, and namely Black people. But people think, and especially critics of the NDP, that we still really not want to dismantle that systems which keeps people into poverty. What do you respond, Dr. Masiteng?
Well, thank you very much for the two questions. Maybe let me start with the issue of the implementation of the National Development Plan. I think because it has only been implemented for the first 9 years and next year will be 10 years. One critical issue that I think the country and yes, those that are the custodians of the NDP should accept is that it has not been implementing and been implemented as the plan of the country. We have implemented it as the plan of government. That's why when we talk about it, we sound like we are attacking the failures of government. We need to improve such that when implementation of the NDP is done, we have started writing a framework that says what should be the implementation of the NDP from 2021 to 2030. So those some of the elements of collaboration, strengthening government, strengthening the partnerships between government and everybody, implementing the National Development Plan, not as a plan of government, but the plan of the country. And I think one of the challenges that we have had has been to rally the country behind the plan. Therefore, everybody sits outside and we need to be able to see it as a plan that encourages everyone, but it needs simplicity and understanding so that everybody can see themselves as part of the NDP, as much as we say we want to see everybody as part of the SDGs. In doing so, we are able to bring everybody same understanding, same platform, and therefore the energy is driven towards better implementation. I think the critical issue that is being asked about job creation, I accept that. I think of critical importance is for all of us to see the role of unemployment as a determinant of poverty and inequality. The difference between the haves and the have-nots is critically embedded and attributable to the fact that others would have because they are employed, therefore they are able to have money and income. The challenge is that with others, they will remain the have-nots if they are not able to participate in any way in the labor market or in the economy. So bringing them, whether as the youth that become game changers as long as when they do that, they will be paid to their efforts, exactly as much as their efforts will be able to also help develop the country and develop the livelihoods of others. So we need to be able to see, when we talk about stimulus, when we talk about employment and job creation, it's about bringing those that have been left outside of the participation in the economy in a manner that they can participate, contribute, but also they can also benefit from the very economy. They can also build and contribute to building our own society. So I think it is about how we understand that it is not just about doing favors and bringing them. They are members of the society. And I think even those that are employed have a way of contributing as game changers, especially at the community level. But when they do so, they should be able to do so that in a manner that help them develop, help them capacitate themselves and the rest of the communities that they live in. And then everybody is able to participate and benefit in the economy that the country is building. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this wise advice. I really want to assure you the partnership of the civil society. Let's really work together, as next year we'll be celebrating 10 years of the NDP. Let's at least really say all branches of our society, we have now made a commitment to make sure that what is in the NDP, we are now able to implement. We are able to correct what did not go well. You did really mention that there has been weaknesses, but I'm sure that if we work together, we can at least move ahead. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to move to the next panelist. I want to quickly check. Do we have Miss Simi Siwisa from ABSA? Please let me know if you are in. So we have someone from ABSA. Okay, let's go to Miss Christina Van Straten. We just spoke about poverty alleviation programs and strategies. There is also new ideas which are coming, or new models. There has been a very, I can say like a push for the universal grant. And we have here someone who have done research in that area to try to understand, is this basic income grant really feasible? Is it possible? Can it be implemented? Ms. Christina Stratton, she's from the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute. She's going to share with us one of the alternative models to end poverty. I would ask my colleagues if they can put her presentation on, and then as she can take the 7 to 8 minutes. I hope you'll be able to use them. Mr. Yaret, are you able to put her presentation on?
Okay, well, I'll just get started while we wait for that. But yes, my name is Christina, and I work at the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, and I am an advocate for the Basic Income Grant, which essentially means that I've been involved in the research and advocacy regarding the Universal Basic Income Grant. So just to jump straight in, from all the presentations that we've heard, we've seen that essentially what we need is radical social and economic reform in order to get this country back on track. And one of the previous speakers was mentioning something in line with the fact that our institutions are not built to tackle poverty, and that is why we see the reproduction of poverty and the same classes and the inheritance of generational wealth. Thank you for getting that up. And I was thinking while he was busy talking of a book, it's called The Locust Effect, and it speaks about how our policing structures were put in place by colonialists to protect colonial powers from the poor, essentially from Black people. And because those structures have not been reformed to protect just the general public and benefit the general public, they are still only in place to benefit wealthy white people. And I think we can take a similar approach of understanding to the current unemployment rates. Our structures have not been reformed since apartheid enough to redistribute wealth, to ensure that we have a larger middle class and a much lower impoverished essentially class. So I think we really need to consider the fact that our institutions are built to reproduce wealth to people that already have it. If you could just go to the next slide for me, that would be great. Oh, can I? I'm not sure who's controlling it. But anyway, you can see on the left-hand side a very small version of our basic income grant infographic. So we are essentially trying to market the basic income grant through the use of visuals and pictures so that the everyday person can understand what the impact of this grant would be. I'm not sure who's controlling the screen. I think it's Yared. If you could just go to the next slide, that would be great. Is anyone there? Okay, well, I'm just going to continue anyway. So the basic income grant that we are advocating for is one of 1,335 Rand a month. That would be universal, meaning that it would be delivered to available to every single South African, regardless of means testing. So means testing, I'm sure most of you know what it means, but essentially means testing is the way in which our current grants are delivered. So you have to prove your poverty and need for the grant in order to acquire it. And the problem with means testing is that it traps people in poverty. So essentially, if you wanted to get a grant, you have to prove that you are impoverished and have no other means of income, which then in turn prevents people from seeking that income because they don't want to lose the grant. But the grants are not substantial enough to live off. So we are advocating, if you can go up, I think 2 slides, that would be great. So the grant that we are advocating for is of 1,335 Rand a month. And that would be available to every single South African. So essentially, the caretakers grant or caregivers grant that's available to people who are raising minors would essentially be upped from, I think it's around 400 Rand a month to 1,335. And then also the elderly pensioners grant would be upped to this amount. So the reason that we are advocating for this amount is because it is large enough to have a substantial multiplier effect in the economy, which basically means that the amount put in, yeah, you can just leave it on that slide for now. The amount invested into this grant scheme has the potential to create a multiplier effect, meaning that it would grow the country's income and productivity. And that can essentially be seen in our increased GDP. If you have a grant smaller than this amount, we see that it's too small to make a significant impact on the economy, which means that it is enabling people to afford basic necessities, but it's not enabling them to become active participants in the economy. So I think the questions that most people have regarding the basic income grant are, first of all, can we afford it? Can we implement it? Is it necessary? And is it going to make people more dependent on the government? And those are all huge myths that have been used to dissuade government, I suppose, from introducing the basic income grant. But essentially, we can afford a basic income grant. At SPI, we have an economist, Duma Mbuhle, who has been working on several basically schemes that would allow us to sorry, I think I lost connection for a little bit, but we've been working on several different schemes that would help us to allow for the funding of the basic income grant. I'm not an economist, it's not my speciality, I'm a sociologist, but our paper that should be coming out next week will expand further on how we can afford those grants. Also, with regard to the higher taxes, I know a lot of people are dead against the basic income grant because for the rich, it would obviously result in higher taxes, but the higher taxes would only affect around 1% of the population, but would have the potential to benefit over 70% of the population. And then if you can go, I think up one slide, please. So when we're looking at what's in it for society, I think this is incredibly important. We've spoken about the social and gendered aspects of poverty and how they affect our people. In a basic income grant pilot that was done in Kenya, they saw a 43% reduction in crime rates in 6 months. And I'm sure as South Africans, most of you could only imagine how much of a difference this would have on people's lives. 43% is by no means a small number. And then we're also looking at the fact that it would allow for the provision of basic human dignity to our people, allowing people to provide for their families and their basic needs. The mental health improvements of knowing that you are getting a certain amount per month and that you can budget on that ground and rely on it is incredible. And we could see that people's productivity within the workplace would likely improve greatly through the implementation of this grant. Also, by giving people spending power, the poorest of the poor are then able to make decisions in their local economies. We see the growth then of township economies and of micro enterprises. So for example, it's tough to start a small business, whether it's selling millies on the side of the road or starting a small spaza shop. You can't do that if you don't have the capital to start it. And so in many countries, we've seen that the implementation of a basic income grant stimulates the launch of these micro enterprises. Also, one of the speakers mentioned child stunting and due to malnutrition. We can't expect youth unemployment to be reduced when our youth are starving and cannot afford the fares to get to school or to wear their school uniforms. And so essentially the few social institutions that government has put in place to help empower young people are mitigated by the fact that they are starving, and our kids cannot reach their full potential because they are stunted cognitively and physically due to malnutrition. So a basic income grant would drastically reduce that. And then lastly, there are many other arguments that could be made, but the reduced burden on women. There is a quote that says that if care work was paid as a regular job, that Black women would be the richest woman on earth. And I think that really speaks to the burden on our women. The basic income grant would really, really benefit Black women in particular, who have more dependence on them and on their incomes than any other group in society. And then also just helping mitigate the burdens on them. If you can go to the next slide, please. Then also for the economy, Juma, our economist, his projection is that the basic income grant would cover itself, meaning that it would pay for itself in 2 years due to the increased VAT collection, the promotion of micro enterprises, and also just stimulating economic growth from the ground level. And so there really is no argument, no feasible or reputable argument that can be made that the basic income grant is not affordable and that it would promote dependency. We also see that recipients of a basic income grant are far more likely to be able to obtain work. Many pilots showcase that women in particular that receive grants are far more likely to be able to find sustainable work. Because, for example, they can pay for someone to look after their child while they go to work, or they're able to afford the taxi necessary to go to a job interview. And then next slide, please. Thank you. So this is just a further representation of how important a basic income grant would be for our Black women. We see that the social security systems inherited by the current government from the apartheid government ensured that formal workers were protected through social insurance policies. And now we're seeing that government still utilizes, in many aspects, those same social protection initiatives, meaning that Black people are most unprotected. So I hope that has made a lot of sense to you all. The research that we are doing on the basic income grant, which will be far more comprehensive than the talk that I just gave, will be released within the next week. So I would love to share that with you all. And I think it's vital that we see the basic income grant as a means of achieving gender equality, as a means of eradicating poverty. We have over 13 million starving South Africans. And the quickest, most effective, most sustainable way of reducing starvation is undoubtedly a basic income grant. And it needs to come now. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this. Remember, we are in a deep crisis, and all these suggestions are really welcome, because when you are in a crisis, you look at every possible solution. And I like the way you really came, even had done the study, even you have calculated the way it's supposed to come. So thank you so much. I'm sure there are questions for you, but you did touch on some of them, where the money will come, but also, is it really not going to create a dependency syndrome? But let's move. I'm sure there will be questions for you. Let's first bring in Mr. Bradley Chabalala. On your side, what needs to happen? We have heard the shocking statistics of unemployment. We have had some suggestion, but really, Mr. Bradley, what needs to happen as we speak about the new social contract? Is Mr. Chabarara in? If Mr. Chabarara, if you are speaking, you are mute. If not, let me, as I'm checking, we meant to finish now. I want to ask you, colleagues, if we can extend just 15 minutes so that we can bring this nice dialogue to a conclusion with, if you can allow me just to extend to 1:15. Let me know. Okay, I see. Yes, thank you. So let's bring in Dr. Alexi. You are an economist, and maybe what is your response first to the suggestion of the universal income grant, but also take us through to what shall we be doing if we really want this new social compact to work? What are the main things we really need to change and to have it in? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Joseph, for allowing me to speak. I will try to be brief in my intervention. Maybe my reaction is directed to the previous panelists. Dr. Masi Teng from the presidency and Ms. Stratman. Yes. First of all, regarding the universal income, by the way, I was very much impressed by the diagnosis that was made because it's on target. The system that was designed to enrich few and protect them against the poor is still there. It's the one that we are still using and that we are still trying to uphold. Now, the question is, how does a system based on giving a universal income and protecting the same system without dismantling it, how does it solve the problem? So the diagnosis is good, but the solution is, oh, let's grow that colonial system and make it even bigger, because the multiplier effect is supposed to create a higher growth rate. By the way, it's always temporary. So if you make it permanent, at the end of 3 to 5 years, the effect is going to disappear anyway. So it just gives a shock when you give it, and it does not last for more than 3 years. So at least the whole philosophy is trying to uphold the same system by stimulating it and hopefully making it grow. It does not make much sense anyway. And regarding the planning, when we put together a social compact of the labor unions, the politicians, and then the business people, it is exactly the same. Let's have those people, the bosses of the colonial system, sit together and negotiate how to keep the poor and tell them that they are going to somehow see the poverty disappear. Poverty does not disappear by a compact or a contract between rich people who are still asking what are the causes of poverty when the poverty is in front of their eyes. So in terms of what can be done, first of all, yes, dismantle the system. Is that basic universal income, is it very helpful? After you have dismantled the system, yes, it's one of the elements. Is it sufficient? No, because we have understood that poverty is a multifaceted phenomenon. You need a whole host of instruments in order to address it. And this is what has been done with success in China. And this is what has been done with success in countries like Singapore. And in contrast, a country like South Korea, which managed to go from a very impoverished country to a developed country in less than 30 years, decided to use a strategy that did not include any poverty alleviation at all. No poverty reduction strategy. They focused on industrialization, massive industrialization. They even promised, let's grow the economy first, there will be redistribution later. And the time of redistribution, when it came, they did not redistribute. So we still have this big problem in Korea, even though the poverty rate is very low, but we have a high level of inequality with a low level of social protection. But most importantly, attacking poverty or fighting against poverty is not giving relief to the poor, giving them income, some kind of soothing thing that will keep them quiet and then hopefully make them forget that they are poor. It's poverty, attacking poverty is about changing the real condition of the impoverished people with them, collaborating with them and changing their lives in a very, very significant way. And this is what China has done. You cannot design poverty alleviation for the poor without the poor themselves lifting themselves out of poverty when you have a good government, when you have a whole host of instruments, including a good quality education, including health insurance, to make sure that people, when they fall sick, they do not lose everything, including creating assets, let's say, also public capital, infrastructure that can be also used in the system as a means of production, because at the end of the day, wealth and prosperity is created by work, and lifting people out of poverty is putting them to work to create that prosperity. And how do you organize that? This is another debate. It's an economics debate, and South Africa has been a very, let's say, a very slow learner in terms of economic performance. But these are the two major problems that need to be solved.
Thank you, Dr. Alexis, for the input. Let me, the team is taking note really. Let me bring in Mr. Bradley Chabalala. Are you in? Mr. Bradley Chabalala is from the South African Small and Medium Enterprise Corporation. So he has two hats here as a business, a small and medium enterprise business, but also from the civil society. What is really needed from here? How do we move forward? Mr. Bradley? As he comes in, let's put our question in the chat room. Quickly checking. Can a colleague unmute Mr. Chabalala, please? Okay. Yes, Mr. Bradley, I'm unmuting you, but it's refusing. I think you need to do something on your side. Maybe let me make you a host and see if it will work. Okay, can you unmute, please, Mr. Bradley? It seems there is a technical problem on. I did make you a host so you can unmute yourself. You can try again. If it's persisting, let's give time to questions and comment. I know we have many questions and comment. Let's now give solutions. How do we move forward? Mr. Bradley, maybe you could put your comment in the section if you were unable to unmute. I tried really, I'm not sure why. Okay, any question from participant? Any suggestions? Any? And if you have a question, please direct the question to whom among our panelists you would want them to answer your question. Let's use the next 10 minutes and then we come up to conclusion. As we take questions, let me take this time to really thank our partners who, because of their support, we've made this, and we also going to have other dialogue. So this is just one to kickstart this conversation, but we will share with you in the next 2 weeks, we're going to have another conversation to the building up to the Open SDG Club Symposium, which Mr. Yared did mention. So we'll be having dialogue to build up to that event, which we are likely to host at the end of November, where we would have now put all your comment, all your suggestion proposal together. Then we will come up with a policy proposal to the government. Caroline, you can unmute yourself and pose a question. Quickly introduce yourself and then be brief in your question or comment. Caroline?
Hey, how are you, everyone?
And I just heard from Dr. Masiteng that the National Planning Commission, through Prof. Vivian Taylor, has developed a paper on the universal grant. I think we will raise with Dr. Masiteng to have that so that we can even put maybe together with suggestions made by Christina so that we can come up with a proper proposal on this one. Caroline, you mentioned that you have a question. Are you able to unmute?
Can everyone hear me? Yes, I've unmute.
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm not sure if it's a technical problem because, yes, Caroline, yes, you can unmute.
Okay.
Over to you, Caroline, and Linux. After you, Linux can take over.
Question one.
Colleagues, are you able to help on to check if there is a technical problem because I seem not to hear Caroline? Over to you, Caroline.
Today, a very fruitful one. We are still going back.
Not sure what is happening. Let me ask a colleague maybe to unmute to see if it's a problem on our side. Mr. Papi, are you able to unmute?
Yes, sir, I can.
Hi, Papi.
Yes, Joseph, I'm online. Joseph, can you hear me? Joseph, can you hear me?
Hi, Papi, we can hear you.
Oh,
I think we can move on to Lennox.
Yeah, no, I had a little bit of a problem in terms of network, so I've changed the direction, but I'm okay now.
Okay, thank you. I think Caroline is having issues with her network, so we can move on to the next person. I think Lennox, he can come in.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Yes, thank you, Joseph. Firstly, Joseph, let me ask you this question. Do you have we will be able to get the presentation before I could go to my question, to my comment?
We will.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Thank you for the good presentation that we've got through you guys. It's a very interesting and a real panel were doing a great work. Just to get more especially in my comment, will be just brief and short because the National Planning Commission, which is Dr. Masi, I think that you have able more especially to put a touch what actually we have realized that I think the issue of the strategy to deal with the issue of the poverty in South Africa, I think there is one thing that actually have never been working properly in South Africa entirely. And the government, I think that if ever can say that they are failing is in that part. And us as a civil society is to work in coordination and making sure that who's doing what in that particular area. Because several times could be civil society organization, whatsoever can name it, you will find that there is a lot of silos working, people working into different, into separate direction that actually cannot be able to be coordinated. But if ever can work on that one, I don't think that we can get to the issue of saying that there is a lack of funding that actually we're facing currently. Because a practical example is that when you go practical in a ward-based level, not getting to the local municipality, not getting to the entire, maybe sometimes a township or a rural, getting to the ward-based, you will see that all the structures that are necessary to build up the community are there. And if ever the structures that actually are there in building the community, which is, or the full society are there, what exactly is needed in terms of making sure that we come up with a resolute strategy that actually is able to bring up a good way forward. So if those things are there and are not implemented properly, definitely sure we'll be seeing the very same situation. I think that I will be agreeing with our doctor. They're saying that we are working maybe sometimes still using the strategy that actually have been there for us to suppress us in terms of making sure that it's liberating us in terms of moving forward. Because we can't really, I mean, keeping on having more and more poverty problems, while actually there is more structures that are there right in the community-based, that is right in a ward-based level. So thank you so much, Joseph and the entire More Special team. But what I would like to say is that hopefully that you guys who have able More Special to allow to speak, is that you will be able to make sure that this thing of uncoordinated must come to an end, and we must know who's doing what at what area that actually is in. It's Lennox from Supumele representing the youth, which are really outraged of what actually is happening, because they are the mostly victimized people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Linux, for even representing the young people. It's good to hear from the youth, and all points you made are well noted. I want to quickly check if we have another comment or question. Any from the panelists who want to comment on what Linux just mentioned? Okay.
I think we can support what Leonard is saying. The critical issues that remain is that by now we need to understand that building compacts also depends on the willingness, not only of government or political will, but the willingness of all social partners to start to work together. And I guess for any organizations and systems to start work together, the issue of trust remains critical. So building trust among social partners might be something that gets considered, so that when we talk about the issue of resources, then having the same understanding of who is doing what, then the issue of resource allocation should go to those that are doing the work on the ground. And there is proper understanding of how it gets cascaded to the hands that are doing the work on the ground. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Masiteng.
Yeah, I think also the other point here is to promote the IDPs, integrated development plans of local municipality. It's a process that is very participatory, which I think it has fallen off from being a very engaging and involvement of civil society, the grassroots, and all sectors from the ground to make to be involved in decision making and to contribute to the very compact at local level. So localization becomes very, very key. And when we look at the SDG, Goal 17 promotes partnerships. So I think as we continue articulating these issues and simplifying this concepts for communities and government as well as local government. Now that we are in this season of local government, we can begin to have some simplified information around how can we make local government succeed and how can we ensure that budgeting, they also receive training. I know that there's a lot of corruption. There were about 8 municipalities that showed what is unqualified audits during 2020. The Auditor General has been lamenting for many years that local government is not providing proper audits. There's resources, billions and billions that got stolen, and we really need to close that door that has been opened due to lack of participation, monitoring, and ensuring that resources go to the right programs or project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colette, for that point noted. And we really should also appreciate the willingness of government when they come and say, let's sit together. So the issue of trust emphasized by Dr. Masiteng is very important. As you can recall, there have been mistrust between partners where you think like different partners and are trying maybe to sabotage each other. But in this new social contract, if the issue of trust can really be taken seriously, I think we can move ahead. We are aware that government has already, we did mention that they want proposals on the new poverty alleviation they are working on. We call again on civil society to submit their submission, but also labor movement lets them come, business come together, civil society, so that we can really fund a new social contract which will work, which will finally work. I want to quickly check if Bradley is ever able to speak. If not, we're going to quickly conclude. Bradley Chabalara, are you able now to unmute? If not, let's hear the concluding remarks from Dr. Alexis, and then Mr. Yared will come and conclude with a very short summary of and the way forward from here. Dr. Alexis.
Thank you very much. My final words on this are no different from what I have said before. So there is a necessity to design a new system with the new thinking that is designed for the people and to help the people, and in which people take action and deliver outcome. Any system that was designed to create inequality and to exclude people from access to means of production, no matter how much you plan and no matter how beautifully you implement, is never going to yield results that are different from those for which it has been designed. Even our university system, our economics theories are designed to reinforce the status quo. And I'm saying that as an economist. If we do not even change the fundamental way in which we teach economics in schools, and we keep telling people that trickle down thing will work, and as long as we just twist and tweak it a little bit, at the end of the day, 10 years from now, we will be singing the same tune, and we will have not achieved anything. And that cannot be the wish of anybody, to be arguing the same thing in 10 years. So I just wish that we understand that there is a need for a paradigm shift, so that with the new thinking and with the understanding that giving productive assets to the people is the way to make them use those assets to create prosperity for themselves. As long as that understanding is not being used in the thinking, we will come here 10 years from now, and we will still be arguing. I hope it won't happen.
Thank you, Dr. Alexi, for that. I'm sure all of us here in this dialogue, we really want things to change. We want, when we come back to discuss this, we could see that there is a change. So thank you so much, colleagues who have been with us. Mr. Yared, if you could really give that short summary and the way forward, and then we conclude.
Thank you, Joseph, for giving me the chance. Today's conversation, probably we started with getting the context right, or a proper understanding of the current. And I think to have our analysis, make sure our analysis is correct before obviously looking at what are the possible solutions. And I think the presidency from Planning Commission, we got that long-term view and responded to the current crisis. You know, we can jump from crisis to crisis, but I think having that long-term view of solving these challenges probably by 2030 is very much helpful. And I think the frankness in terms of recognizing the challenge we face as a government and as society in responding to the challenges of the current crisis was very much helpful. And I think in terms of the crisis, I think the analysis of it related to unemployment, inequality, poverty, food insecurity, violence, and gender-related issues were correctly put by the panelists, and I think that was very, very much helpful. So, and I think obviously we dealt with the basic income grant as one way of dealing with this challenge we face, which I think a lot of us would agree with, the idea of basic income grant. But obviously, at some point, we may want to look at what are the alternatives to it, because I think we've been talking about sustainable livelihoods, we've been talking about resilient livelihoods, so all type of choices we could look at. But I think more importantly for this specific conversation, or from this South Africa Working Group on SDGs, we are very much interested to frame those conversations with this social compact. A social compact being built from ground up, from community to a national level, because Dr. Alexis very rightly much so said that at a high level, labor, rights, business and government cannot sit and agree on what should the country look like. And I think that democratic process, if we are dividing the social compact, then probably we need to look at building the social compact from ground up rather than sort of at a very high level conversation. I think that is, and the other hope, I was hoping that Namshila, maybe she was joining us and listening to this conversation, and I'm hoping that the conversation which is happening on unemployment and poverty at the presidency level, and we hope to influence that process, which we just started last week, and we hope to make a written submission to the process. And as one of the colleagues said, that there are multiple processes going on parallel, and sometimes there is lack of coherence, and we hope that we will be able to address that, to address that kind of issue. So to conclude, this is sort of a start of a conversation, of multiple conversations in dealing the various the crisis which colleagues framed early in the morning, and I think we'll continue the conversation on gender equality and women's empowerment in our next multi-stakeholder conversation, and we'll have another round of conversation in partnership with COSATU to look at the possible solutions for unemployment crisis in the country. And then probably with the recent social unrest and the crisis of safety, which were witnessed, obviously our colleague from Horisa will be able to look at GO 16 sometime in the future as well. How do we address this level of violence which we witnessed last 3 months ago, and hopefully how do we build a peaceful society? So those are probably some of the pillars which we're looking at. Obviously, before, like the last minute I want to use is probably creating the impulses for establishment of the National Development Stakeholders Forum. We keep on working on that, and at some point I'm hoping that we will host events under this umbrella. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Yared, for that good way forward. Colleagues, let's really keep engaging each other. But also in concluding, let me mention that this event is part of the South African civil society also taking part at the Global Week to Act for SDGs. So let's keep the conversation even online going. If you have any suggestion, please feel free to email us. On social media, we did share our social media handles. It's at African Monitor on Twitter and same as Facebook. Let's use the provided hashtag. The first one is hashtag Act for SDGs. The 4 is 4 as a number. Then there is also turn it around, and then the UNGA, the UNGA. So let's keep using those hashtags. A big thank you to all of you who did take part. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our volunteers across South Africa, and our community mobilizers. I was going to say our ground forces, but it sounds like a political. Our people who are in Free State, Northern Cape, Western Cape, and Katehong in Gauteng, whom we work together on every issue. We really thank you so much. Once again, thank you to Dr. Masiteng for making it. We really don't take this for granted. You will be receiving our communication as we have now kickstarted this dialogue, and we hope to keep working with you. Thank you to Namsla Muniki, who also joined this conversation. As part of the presidency, you will also receive a submission from the civil society. We hope to work together in this process. And then thank you to everyone who joined for your time and for your contribution. We hope to keep this conversation ongoing. Have a blessed afternoon ahead. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Goodbye,
you.
goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.